Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Ben Remfrey, founder and managing director of Praedium Consulting Malta. Ben is going to tell us about his career, which is all about explosive ordnance disposal, counter improvised explosive device defeat, ammunition management to prevent unplanned explosions in munitions depots, etc., etc., and the control and elimination of landmines. Ben, good to see you.
Tony, thanks for having me on the show. It's much appreciated.
And of course, you're in Croatia today, so you get around a bit.
Yes, I'm actually here for an annual symposium, which is very important. It's hosted by the Croatian government, and the main thrust of this symposium is Ukraine.
Yeah, yeah, of course, that's the hot subject at the moment. How did you come up with the company's name?
Oh, look, I've been involved in mine action, and when we use the term mine, it refers to everything: unexploded ordnance disposal, counter ID, and everything else. It's a humanitarian term that's acceptable. I've been involved in the industry for 35 years, so I spent quite a lot of time in Libya. At that time, I moved my family to Malta.
Yeah,
And we set up a Maltese company, which was called Praedium Consulting Malta. And Praedium is really the Latin for land,
yeah.
because everything that we do, Tony, is related to releasing land back to people, land that's been contaminated by conflict. And we just wanted to come up with an original name. So I thought I'd delve into the Latin side, and that's where Praedium came from.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed. Now, tell us a bit about your career in the British Army, because you were with the Royal Engineers and 59 Commando, weren't you?
I was, yeah. I joined the army as I was only just 16 when I joined the army as a junior leader in the Royal Engineers. I finished my education there, and then after about 14 months, I went into the regular army. And I like everybody else, I sort of found my own interests and used the army to benefit that. I did a lot of sport. And then when I sort of got serious about being a soldier, I volunteered for commando forces. And the Royal Engineers at the time had a specialist elite commando unit of about 100 odd men. And I volunteered for the beat up, as it was called at the time, which is generally what it was. You were taken in, you were basically worked very hard physically and mentally, and then if the squadron wanted you, then they send you on the all arms commando course, and I then did that, flew through it, and then I spent probably the best years of my life as a soldier with 59 Commando, and it's the friends I made then in the early 80s are still close friends to this day. And we went on a few operational tours, and we did the things that you do as a young man in the military, and you sort of regret when you get to your 60s, because not everything works as it did because of
Aches and pains.
yeah, the aches and pains. But we yeah, while I was there, I was diving, did EOD, a bit of parachuting, all of that stuff as well. So yeah, no, I had a fantastic time. And yeah, and I loved it. And I spent a lot of time teaching people Arctic and mountain warfare as well, and skiing. So because obviously in those days the Commander Brigade was Northern Flank, and that was our role. So yeah, no, I don't regret it, and I learned a lot.
I mean, looking at the British Army now, you can get them into one of the larger football stadiums. Where's it all gone wrong?
I think it's the nature of warfare these days, and
Yeah.
I think the British Army has had to adapt over hundreds of years to its role. And in sort of 80s and 90s, the role was almost like an international police force.
Mm.
And then we had the advent of Afghanistan and Iraq, which was far more war fighting, so that the military had to evolve to deal with that. And then since the end of Afghanistan, and the withdrawal, the military's changed again. But the thing about the British fighting soldier is we're very proud of the fact that we can adapt and we can prove ourselves when it comes to combat and ridding the world of the evil to a degree. And nothing changes. I think the young people of today, we've still got that mindset. And if you look at my old commando unit, the guys that are serving in it today, the 18, 19, and 20-year-olds are as good as we were back in the
Yeah,
early 80s.
yeah, yeah. Um, of course, I suppose, everything is a lot more technical now, isn't it? In many
It is.
respects,
Yeah.
drones and
Yeah.
things like that. But let's get on to the main thrust of this chat. Explosive ordnance disposal. That's bomb and mine disposal. How do you select your specialists for that one? Because I know that you do a lot of lecturing on this subject, don't you?
We do, and my company, Praedium, we are the world's foremost training organization to what we call international mine action standards. So it's a standard that is recognized throughout the world. So, every country's military, air force, police, they all have their own sort of standards in terms of how they go about training their people. And what we have done is embrace this international mine action standard and make it the benchmark that all countries that are involved in humanitarian clearance and also involved in deployments to areas that are recovering from conflict adhere to this IMAS standard. Selection, that's a good question. I always put the onus on the countries sending their people to select people wisely. On our international courses, which are pay per seat, then we actually filter those people ourselves and we accept or decline them based on their CV, based on their recommendations, on their references, and based on beliefs as well, because we've got to be very careful that the people that we train are the right people that are going to use that training for the ends that we believe in
I
and
mean,
which fit with the
are
humanitarian principles.
most of them with a military background?
A large percentage are with a military background,
Yeah.
and but when it comes to client countries that use us, because what you're going to understand, Tony, is we have a lot of clients that we provide training for who are host countries and nations and their special police or their military. And therefore, that sort of training you won't see on our website. There's a lot of client confidentiality
Mm.
on that. But when it
Yeah.
comes to our pay per seat courses and our scheduled courses that people can see on our website, then those are all sort of above board um, and are not subject to any confidentiality. But yeah, we put the onus on the people that are going to send their people to us for training, like for example, a special police force from the Middle East that need their guys trained in counter ID. Then it's up to us to make sure that that client selects wisely, because we say to them, if you spend all of this money on a training course and up to 12 weeks with some of these groups, then don't send us somebody that's going to fail, because you're wasting your time and you're wasting a lot of money in that respect.
Do you go to them or do they come to you for training?
Bit of both, Tony, really. We deploy training cadres, but we've also got this bespoke training facility in the Balkans, and I have about 40 staff. We have 46 catered beds, numerous classroom and training infrastructure. We have live ranges. We have storage of ammunition natures, which are live and fused, because one thing that we insist on is that every level of training that we deliver, that particular student has to qualify on the disposal of live fused munitions, and that's unique in our industry, and it's something that we're very proud of.
Can you tell us a bit more about counter improvised explosive device defeat? I mean, presumably that's
It,
sort of cleaning up after the event, is it?
it is. Um, when there's been conflict and you're dealing with conventional munitions disposal, so anything that's left after fighting, anything that's dropped, placed, or fired and has failed to function, that's conventional munitions disposal. When
Mhm.
it comes to look, everybody knows the word booby trap. And in the past, for hundreds of years, booby traps have been laid. And the IED is really a more sophisticated form of booby trap. It's an improvised device, and people need to understand that any improvised device, certainly these days, has a main charge, which is sometimes it can be a conventional munition like a projectile, or it can be homemade explosives. Then you have a power source, okay, which allows the device to function once it's triggered, which is then the victim operated system of stepping on a pressure plate or crossing a PR sort of beam. And unfortunately these days, the technology curve when it comes to IEDs is quite steep. So, what you deal with one day is completely different to what you're dealing with um, the next week. And in the past, we've dealt with the situation where when a terrorist organization or something like Wagner go into an area like they did in southern Tripoli, and when they withdrew, they seeded those residential areas with IEDs in toilet cisterns, under floorboards, in darkened spaces where you then project light and then the triggers then function. So dealing with an IED is very, very different than dealing with a conventional munition because of the limitations.
I wasn't really aware of them until we got to the Afghan campaign, and they seemed to crop up on a very regular basis there, didn't they? Particularly
They
blowing
did.
up Land Rovers.
Absolutely. Iraq and Afghanistan was the rebirth of the IED, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. Ammunition management. I guess to a lot of us that sounds a fairly obvious thing to do. In terms of keeping it secure, etc., etc. But does the world lack a situation where we're really looking after stuff properly?
Well, again, it's a good point, Tony. And it's all about husbandry. It's all about discipline and it's all about standards. If you were to go in a Western military's ammunition storages, you would see that everything would be perfectly laid out, that there wouldn't be mixed ammunition in storages. You wouldn't have detonators and fuses in the same storage as ammunition. That everything would be isolated, the electrics would be isolated, that you wouldn't be doing controlled burns on or uncontrolled burns of foliage around those storages.
Yeah,
But unfortunately, this isn't the case in the developing world. In places such as in the past, where there's been UEMs, you've had places like Albania, various countries in Africa where there's been catastrophic detonations of ammunition storages, and that's just down to people not doing things properly and not having a standard and just getting lackadaisical and complacent. And complacency in our industry generally kills,
yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah, yeah. Now, in terms of mines, I thought there was an international convention, the Ottawa Convention, that basically shut these things down completely. It's quite clear that that hasn't been the case because recently, I believe Poland announced that they were going to withdraw from the obligation. Uh, where are we on that one? I mean, a convention isn't global law, is it?
It isn't, and you have to be a signatory to actually adhere to it. And unfortunately, Russia, China, India, the United States of America, they're non-signatories, so they can still manufacture and still use.
Yeah, and they'd be manufactured in the case of the states in the states.
Well, any country that's a non-signatory, Tony, take it as read that they're actually manufacturing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Are you disappointed with this, or do you just accept the fact that the big boys, call the shots?
Well, if you take the Balkan states at the moment and the fact that people like Poland Lithuania, Latvia, that they're concerned that the Russians will try and invade them if they get their way in Ukraine and if they get some momentum. So the only reason that they're thinking of withdrawing is so that they can protect their borders. And you look in a humanitarian sense, the proliferation of landmines is a terrible thing, but in a controlled way, I suppose it's a deterrent, isn't it? And the way that mines were used in the past, certainly World War II, that they were used, minefields were marked, and it was all designed to channel the enemy into an area where you could concentrate your um, firepower, like
Yeah,
artillery and everything.
yeah.
And
So,
and I think that's the same way in which the Poles and others in the Balkan states are thinking of how to try and defend and secure their areas, because you just look across how um, how much uh, defense spending is now going on in that area. And of course, the landmines will fall into that because
mm.
it's a deterrent.
'Cause, um, Diana, Princess of Wales, led a campaign, didn't she? Which was, I guess, pretty successful in terms of trying to alleviate the sort of injury that landmines cause. But presumably that's now a bit of history rather than being a current situation.
No, I think the legacy of that lives on, Tony. I think it will. I think before the Princess of Wales, Diana, before she brought it to the public's attention and championed it, then nobody really knew anything about it,
Mm.
about landmines, about how they affect returning communities to areas after conflict. And she was enormous in the fact that she managed to persuade the UN and various nations, and what happened with Ottawa as well. That can all be put down to the fact that Diana used her persona and her fame to do something quite incredible. And as I said, the legacy remains.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear because I mean it was a major departure, wasn't it, for somebody associated with the royal family to get involved so deeply in this sort of situation.
I think you're right, and everybody regards Diana's involvement as having changed things incredibly
Yeah,
from the way that it was before she championed it.
yeah, yeah. Let's get on to your MBE. Now, I understand that you actually had that presented to you by the Queen, the late Queen. That must have been something.
Oh yeah, it was. I'd met the Queen a couple of times prior. One thing that we have a bit of a joke about the MBE, certainly when you're in the military, is the MBE stands for My Bloke's Efforts. So you're really picking up an award for something that the organization has done, but that you just happen to be the head of at the time.
Yeah,
I actually got my MBE. The citation was more for my involvement in Rwanda after the genocide, because my organization that I led had trained the Rwandan army, and then over 3 years we mentored them and controlled the clearance of the minefields in Rwanda. And then Rwanda met its Ottawa Article 5 obligation of a mine-free country by 2010, as it was back then. So I'm immensely proud of that. But that wouldn't have been achieved without A, my team on the ground, but B, the Rwandan military and their discipline and the way they went about doing the clearance was remarkable. They were fantastic. So, credit to them.
did the Queen have special words for you when she made the presentation?
Look, the royal family are incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to what it is that, the amount of work and background and research that people do, and then the briefings that the royals have before they give an award. They ask all the right questions. They absolutely know what they're talking about. But the moment is always quite special, and it flies by. And you're always quite nervous of meeting the monarch, but
Yeah.
yeah, gracious, knowledgeable, and just a shining light. The Queen was and always will be.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with you there. Now, you also received the Paul Harris Fellowship from the Rotary Club International for life-saving works that you led. Was that before or after the MBE?
That was before yeah, I think that was before.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was mainly for the clearance that we did in I think Kosovo back in 99 through to 2003, because the organization I led then, we did a lot of the surveys of the areas that were mined, and certainly the areas that were subject to a lot of the cluster munitions. We did all the clearance, survey and clearance of those areas. So yeah, again, it's nice picking up an award, and something from Rotary is a special thing. And it's always nice to be recognized, but you're always mindful that anything that I get is on behalf of the team that I work with, and most of those people have been with me for those 25 years.
That's incredible, isn't it? Yeah. So, are you able to tell us what countries are engaging you at the moment, or would you prefer not to?
Well, I think clearly, and it's well documented, we're heavily involved with Ukraine.
Yeah.
We were the first people to start training Ukrainians to do iron mass clearance, both from survey to demining to explosive ordnance disposal. Way back, well, I've been advising the Ukrainians since 2017. Obviously, the war in Donbass in the west happened, sorry, in the east happened well before the full-scale invasion of 2022. But since 2022, we've been training Ukrainian groups back to back, the police, the state special transport services, the emergency services, the National Guard, and their army engineers. And we've been training those people to do clearance to international standards, Tony. So we're not teaching them anything in terms of warfighting.
No.
We're teaching them how to clear ordnance and do counter ID in areas that have either been liberated by them, or come the glorious peace when it does come, they're going to be heavily involved in doing the clearance themselves, and mindful that the military will take the brunt of that. We spent the last couple of years training a lot of the army engineers, and we've been doing that both in Kosovo and in Ukraine, and we're going to up that in the next couple of months. We're going to start doing a lot more training inside Ukraine in a mobile sense, going between units and delivering training, because I hope that the war will come to an end pretty soon, and when it does, those areas that are liberated and those areas that are held by the Ukrainians are going to need to be cleared, and for both population moving back in, but also because of economic issues in terms of power stations,
Yeah.
agricultural land, and the likes.
Yeah. Because I mean, the Russian effort has gone to destroy an awful lot of Ukraine in terms of its ability to provide food and, as you say,
The,
electricity and everything else. Yeah.
the contamination in Ukraine is estimated to be the size of the landmass of Syria. And if
Really?
you take that, yes.
Yeah.
So it's the most contaminated country on the planet now, and it's got all this contamination obviously since the conflict started. Other areas we work, look, we work in North Africa, we work in the Middle East, we have clients from numerous countries, and we're always providing training to them as well. Although Ukraine is our main thrust and one that we're committed to, we as a commercial organization also have to pay our salaries for our staff and cover their insurance and make sure that we're a viable concern. So therefore, the commercial work that we do outside of Ukraine, because what we do in Ukraine, Tony, is heavily subsidized by us as an organization.
Yeah.
We do it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
We don't because we think we're going to make money out of it. All of the training that we do in Ukraine per person is at a significant discount over what it is we do commercially.
Yeah, it's all about the humanitarian aspect, isn't it, from that point of view?
Yeah.
When
Absolutely.
when you train people to carry out bomb disposal, mine disposal, whatever, what's the casualty rate like? Because obviously, there must be occasions when these things go wrong in terms of trying to disarm them?
Look, there's an attrition rate. It's a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah,
It's like being a fisherman in the North Sea in going out in stormy weather. It's, the danger factor escalates dealing with machinery and hauling pots and nets, and people lose arms and they're killed.
yeah,
There's no difference when it comes to doing explosive disposal. You are dealing with something that's an area, it's very, very dangerous.
mm,
And because it's been fired or dropped and has failed to go bang, so to speak, doesn't mean it isn't. And a lot of the time it's extremely unstable. Therefore, if people that we train stick to the procedures on everything in terms of whether it's an airdrop weapon or an IED, then they don't become a casualty. But unfortunately, sometimes people get complacent, try to cut corners, or they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'll give you an example of uh, Vadim. He was a young man that came to us for his initial training in 2023. He came back in 2024 to do his intermediate. He came back to do his advanced course in which finished in February of 2025, so only last month. He went back to Ukraine, and within a week, he was standing outside a bakery, and a suicide bomber killed him and a couple of his colleagues. There was no way of mitigating
no,
that, but he stands out as an example. Okay, he wasn't killed dealing with a device. Some of the guys that we've trained have been killed by drones when they've been trying to operate in forward areas. To my knowledge, only one or two of the international students that we've trained have become victim and been killed in Ukraine as part of the International Legion that have been doing clearance. And again, a lot of the time, Tony, people get killed when they're trying to operate above their level of competency.
yeah,
And
yeah,
unfortunately, perceptions, and I'll give you an example of Libya. We trained the Libyan guys, the police and the rest of them to do conventional munitions disposal. When Wagner Group tried to take southern Tripoli in 2019, 2020, and when they withdrew and ceded those areas with IEDs, the Libyan authorities said to their EOD teams, "You're the experts, go in and deal with them." The guys were not trained to deal with IEDs, they were trained to deal with conventional munitions. Then, because of the pressure, they went and they were very, very brave. They went into those areas, and within a couple of weeks, a third of them had been killed.
yeah,
Okay. And
yeah,
another third of them had witnessed their colleagues being pink misted, being blown apart by IEDs, and therefore didn't and were traumatized, didn't want to go in, and therefore they were operating above their level of competency. They had no training to deal with IEDs. And then what we did was we sent a cadre in, and then over 6 months we trained and mentored what was left of those guys, and they went in, and none of them were killed, and they managed to clear all the IEDs. So it's dealing at the right levels. It's Russian roulette unless you know exactly what you're doing and you're qualified.
yeah, yeah. Looking at the Falklands, 30,000 mines took 38 days, 38 years, sorry, 38 years to clear. Um, and you reckon Ukraine's probably worse than that in terms of the, number of mines and IEDs around. How long would that take, do you think?
Now, look, the situation in the Falklands was quite different. The international community decided that because the Argentinians had laid those mines, that they needed to clear them. The Argentinians didn't.
Yeah,
The minefield marking was put up and maintained by the Falklands farmers, who were getting revenue from doing that. There was the all military tourism where people wanted to go to the Falklands, and then, as well as seeing the penguins and everything else, they wanted to see the minefields. So the impetus in clearing those areas, and those areas weren't critically important to revenue or anything else. Therefore, it was the Falkland Islands themselves weren't overly keen on having the mines cleared
mm,
because of the revenue it was creating.
mm,
Eventually, yes, a few UK companies did the clearance after many, many years. So that mustn't be comparable to any other situation.
no, okay.
Situation in Ukraine is there's millions of items of unexploded ordnance. So you imagine any of those areas that have been fought over, the defensive positions, they would have laid mines. There would have then been overlay from fighting, from ordnance. The scale of the situation in terms of contamination in Ukraine is off the scale in terms of any other country on the planet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, we must sort of reveal your Guernsey connection, mustn't we? And to that end, you were there not so long ago, discovered this World War II bomb, which I think, am I right in saying it was an RAF piece of munition that was dropped, well, not accidentally, but just getting rid of the payload on the way back to base. Is that correct?
The situation with the airdrop weapons at the full-on has been known since they dropped on the evening of March 1941.
Right.
And as well, it's well documented. A stick of four bombs was dropped. One apparently functioned, and I have seen aerial imagery that shows there was a crater. The other three went quite deep. So we're not talking one bomb, we're talking three.
Hmm.
And the unfortunate situation is because they were buried and because the Germans collapsed the holes, the funnels where the bombs went in, and because an uneducated German lieutenant who was a military policeman said to a Guernsey policeman who was guarding the site, "Don't worry about that. You'll be able to build on there in the future." Unfortunately, Guernsey took it literally, and they built what they call Wellington Close, very close by the area where the bombs are known to have dropped. So, it's a bit odd that the development was allowed in the first place, but then to call it Wellington Close after the Vickers Wellington that potentially dropped the bombs is another matter. I think it was irresponsible. I then took the states to task and said that no proper deep survey was ever done, and it wasn't. They only did a shallow tick of the box survey before they allowed the close to be built. And now it's a situation whereby I've managed to get the states to change tack, and they will be doing a deep survey of the area and locate the bombs.
So,
Yeah,
so
go on.
you found one, and there are
No,
another
no,
two unaccounted
I,
for.
no. Well, we haven't found anything yet, but
Right.
the historical data and research shows that there's three bombs
Yeah.
that failed to function because the holes were found and were measured.
Yeah.
And we know that the bombs went in there, but nothing was ever done because they assumed that there wouldn't be a threat in the future. But unfortunately, these days, a lot of these bombs are high explosive,
Mm.
and they don't have fuses, but they have what we call pistols. Now, a pistol is a cock striker mechanism whereby it should function when the bomb impacts.
Mm.
But a lot of these triggers, in terms of the pistol, they're deteriorating and letting go. And you saw the bomb by the Japanese airfield. That was an American bomb with a pistol that functioned in October last year
Yeah.
when our aircraft was taxiing close by. And there's been numerous incidents around Europe in the last few years where even after 80 years of these bombs being dropped, they're starting to function or let go because the fusing systems are actually actuating, and the high explosives, it's dangerous.
And we're talking about some kit, what, 80 years old or even older?
Well, if those three bombs are indeed £1,000 British general purpose bombs that are lying by alongside Wellington Close in Route Isabel, if one was to function, there's a high probability the other two will go as well because
Yeah.
of the ground
Yeah.
pressure, because the force projected through the ground. If all three were to function, then that's £1,000 of TNT going off in one area in one go, and it would be catastrophic,
I can
believe me.
imagine. Yeah. Dreadful. Absolutely. Can
Yeah.
we just conclude by talking very quickly about the herd deep, which viewers may or may not know? It's deepest part of the English Channel, and this is where a lot of World War One and World War Two ordnance was dumped. Is that a risky situation from everybody's point of view, or being so deep underwater, is it pretty safe?
Well, it's 170 to 180 meters deep. If you look at the other areas of planet Earth, um, the Mindanao Trench and other areas dwarf that in terms of depth.
Yeah,
What another thing to understand, Tony, and relates to the last question as well is British aircraft that used to bomb European targets, and certainly down on the west coast of France, and certainly in the case of the Route Isabel bombs, they had a jettison point. They could never land. British bombers couldn't land with their bombs with pistols in because they were armed.
yeah,
Therefore, on their way back to the UK, if they'd missed the target because of cloud or whatever else, then they had to jettison their payloads in an
yeah,
area, and the Herd Deep was actually marked as an area where they should jettison their payloads. Now, if you draw a line between Brest and 1941, the attack on the Admiral Hipper that was in dry dock to the airfields in southern England, then it goes straight over the top of Guernsey. And
yeah,
that's why we assumed that it was jettisoned from that night, that a bomber was aiming to drop its bombs in the Herd Deep, but just happened to jettison them over Guernsey instead. That's a plausible that's plausible to assume. The problem with the Herd Deep is not just conventional munitions and explosives. There's a lot of chemical weapons that were dumped there after World War One.
yeah.
And there's a lot of radioactive waste that was dumped there as well. And I think in terms of the environment and in terms of any risk, I think the high explosive risk is dwarfed by the radioactive risk.
On that worrying note, we've run out of time. It's been a
Well,
great.
there's a lot of plutonium that was dumped there, a lot of plutonium, and I think the lifespan of that plutonium they dumped there is 20,500 years. There you
to,
go.
to be precise. Ben, it's been an
Yes.
absolute pleasure to chat to you. Thank you so much for sparing me some time. And you just make sure you take care of yourself, will you?
Thanks, Tony. It's been a pleasure, and it's always nice to answer educated questions as well. So it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
All the very best. Thanks, Ben. Cheers.